December 1944. The forests of Belgium were cold enough to freeze the oil inside a tank engine. From the dark timber lines came the thunder of German armor, Tigers and Panthers rolling through the mist, their barrels cutting shadows into the dawn. American soldiers had learned to read that sound, the grinding metallic roar that meant death was approaching. But among them moved something different, smaller, leaner, faster. The M18 Hellcat didn't lumber, it hunted. It wasn't supposed to exist this way. When the United States entered the war, doctrine said tank destroyers should strike from a distance, using speed, not armor, to survive. The Hellcat was born from that theory, a machine built not to slug it out, but to outthink and outmaneuver. Its designers at Buick stripped everything down to the essentials: thin armor to save weight, a high-velocity 76 gun to pierce enemy steel, and a Wright 9-cylinder radial engine that could push it beyond 50 miles per hour, the fastest armored vehicle of the war. To crews climbing inside, it felt almost reckless, a whisper of armor, a roar of horsepower. But the men who drove it soon discovered that speed itself was armor. If you could move faster than a Panther could traverse its turret, you could live to fire again. As German panzers pushed through the Ardennes, Hellcat crews began ambushing from unexpected angles. They'd appear, strike, vanish, a flash of muzzle fire followed by the whine of a reverse gear. Reports from the front tell of German tank commanders shouting over radios, confused by targets that seemed to disappear between hedgerows. One officer later admitted they moved like ghosts between the trees. For every Tiger that crawled through the mud, a Hellcat darted along frozen roads, firing and relocating before the Germans could even swing their barrels. It was mechanical daring made flesh, American engineers answering armor with agility. By the time the Battle of the Bulge erupted, German crews began to dread clear mornings. They whispered that the open daylight favored the Hellcat. Fog, at least, could hide them. The tank that made them pray for it was already waiting somewhere in the mist. The M18 Hellcat's legend wasn't forged in the blueprint stage, it was written in the chaos of battle. By the time the Ardennes offensive began, the U.S. 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion was among the few units equipped with the new machine. In Bastogne, surrounded and outnumbered, they proved what agility and nerve could achieve where brute force failed. German tanks dominated open ground, but in the narrow Belgian roads choked with fog and smoke, the Hellcat became a phantom. Its radial engine screamed through the trees as crews executed shoot and scoot tactics. They would fire a single round, then vanish before German optics could even align. Infantrymen recalled watching Hellcats slide sideways into new positions, their commanders coolly scanning for silhouettes through periscopes streaked with frost. In one engagement near Naval, a lone Hellcat knocked out a Tiger at 800 yards with a perfectly placed round to the turret ring, then sped off before the German column realized which direction the shot had come from. German field reports began to reflect a new unease. Panther and Tiger crews, once accustomed to dictating every encounter, now faced an enemy that moved faster than their own calculations. The Hellcat's gun could penetrate German armor at range, and its speed made return fire a desperate guess. One captured crewman told his interrogators that the M18 appeared from nowhere like the wind. By the time we turned, it was gone. Inside the vehicle, life was a mixture of precision and terror. The open-top turret left the men exposed to shrapnel, snow, and small arms fire, but also gave them unmatched visibility. Loader, gunner, and commander worked in a rhythm that felt more like choreography than combat, the gun recoiling, the shell casing flying out, another round slammed home. Every motion counted, every second mattered. They had no illusions about what protected them, not armor but audacity. As the battle for Bastogne dragged on, Hellcats served as mobile artillery, flanking vehicles, and rearguard defenders all at once. Their speed allowed them to appear wherever pressure was greatest. By Christmas 1944, word spread through German tank companies. If you hear an engine screaming in the fog, it's already too late. The Hellcat's power came not only from its mechanics but from the minds behind its controls. Crews were typically young, many in their early 20s, drawn from small towns across America. They were mechanics, sons, farmhands, and factory apprentices, men who knew machines instinctively. What they lacked in armor, they compensated with skill, nerve, and teamwork. To drive the Hellcat was to balance chaos and calculation. The driver's world was vibration and noise. The radial engine howled inches behind him, and the thin steel hull amplified every ricochet and shockwave. The commander's world was decision-making, whether to engage or retreat, knowing a single wrong move could mean instant destruction. And yet they loved the machine. The Hellcat responded like a living thing. Push it too far and the suspension protested. handle it right, and it danced over terrain that left heavier tanks bogged and helpless. In the narrow lanes of the Ardennes, that agility was priceless. German tanks were monsters, heavily armored, thick with steel but sluggish on frozen mud. The Hellcat could circle them like a wolf around an ox. Its top speed exceeded 50 miles per hour, unheard of for an armored vehicle of its class. Crews exploited that fact ruthlessly. They used reconnaissance reports, terrain memory, and pure instinct to find ideal ambush sites. Fire once, relocate, fire again, never be seen twice in the same place. German officers soon realized they weren't fighting a tank, they were fighting a tactic. The Hellcat embodied a new kind of warfare, fast, flexible, and decentralized. Instead of relying on head-on duels, American units created fluid kill zones, using Hellcats to lure Panthers into traps where artillery or infantry bazookas waited. It was combined arms in motion, a philosophy the U.S. Army was still perfecting, but one the Germans could no longer counter effectively under constant Allied air pressure. When fog rolled through the Ardennes valleys, German crews sighed in relief. The mist meant they could move unseen, temporarily safe from the eyes of fast-moving predators. But when the fog lifted and the sound of engines echoed across open fields, dread returned. Somewhere beyond the trees, a Hellcat gunner adjusted his sights. By early 1945, the M18 Hellcat had earned its reputation as the fastest tank destroyer on the Western Front, but speed alone didn't win battles. What truly set it apart was how it embodied the American way of war, the belief that efficiency, mobility, and production could overcome perfection. While German designers obsessed over complexity, thick armor plates, intricate optics, and overlapping road wheels, American engineers built for adaptability. The Hellcat's lightweight hull could be produced faster, its radial engines already standardized across aircraft and armored vehicles. Each one cost less than a tenth of a Tiger's production price. And where the Germans built hundreds, America built thousands. The result wasn't just a weapon, it was momentum. In Italy, Hellcats roamed the Apennines like mountain cats, bounding between villages, chasing retreating German columns. In France, they ambushed armored convoys from tree lines, striking before fading into the countryside. Tank destroyer battalions began to improvise beyond their doctrine. The Hellcat wasn't merely defensive anymore, it became an offensive spearhead for fast-moving infantry. Its mobility meant it could rush into breakthroughs, exploit gaps, and crush counterattacks before they formed. Reports from the 823rd Battalion near the Moselle River described Hellcats racing alongside Sherman tanks, engaging Panthers from flanking angles the slower vehicles couldn't reach. Soldiers joked that the Hellcat could outrun its own shells, but those jokes hid admiration. German prisoners often asked about the small tank that moved too fast to hit. The weapon's psychological impact mattered almost as much as its armor-piercing rounds. German commanders began ordering their tank units to travel under cover of fog or darkness. They understood what daylight meant now: exposure. The Hellcat turned open terrain into death traps. Even Luftwaffe reconnaissance reported spotting small, fast American vehicles darting across fields before disappearing into barns or forest tracks, impossible to target from the air. Each battle proved the same point. The Hellcat wasn't about surviving hits, it was about never being hit at all. It transformed fear into fuel, converting every weakness, thin armor, open turret, limited protection, into speed and control. For every tiger's roar, there was a Hellcat's whisper, the sound of survival moving faster than fear itself. The front-line stories became legend among Allied troops. In the frozen ruins of Foy, a platoon of Hellcats ambushed a German armored column that had mistaken them for retreating scouts. The lead Panther never saw them fire. Its turret lifted clean off under the force of a 76 shell, and before the rear tank could react, the Hellcats had already changed position. When German infantry advanced to check the wrecks, they found the American vehicles gone, only smoking hulls and deep tread marks in the snow remained. Commanders began using the M18 as a symbol of adaptability. In training manuals distributed through 1945, instructors cited it as proof that maneuver could defeat armor, that the modern battlefield belonged to those who moved first, not those who hit hardest. The crews themselves carried a kind of pride born of defiance. They called the Hellcat our lucky cat, and some painted whiskers or cat eyes on the gun mantlet, but they knew luck had nothing to do with it. Skill, timing, and nerve were the real armor. Each Hellcat carried only 5 men. They lived like brothers in a steel shell, sweating in summer, freezing in winter, sharing coffee and fear in equal measure. A tank destroyer crew didn't dream of glory, they dreamed of one more dawn. When they fired, the smell of cordite filled the open turret, and the recoil slammed through their bones. They learned to measure success not in medals, but in the seconds bought for infantry behind them. By the war's last months, German morale toward tank engagements had shifted. Veterans of Kursk and Normandy spoke of a new terror, not artillery, not air raids, but these small, fast-moving tank destroyers that refused to fight fair. Fog became their ally because it hid them from the Hellcat's range. And so, in an ironic twist, German tank crews, once feared across Europe, now prayed for bad weather. For American soldiers, the Hellcat came to represent something deeper. It wasn't just another weapon, it was proof that ingenuity could rewrite the rules of war. A handful of men in a thin-skinned machine could stand against the best armored Germany ever built and win. When victory finally came in 1945, the M18 Hellcat rolled through towns that bore the scars of its own speed. Its engines coughed black smoke, its hulls dented and scratched, its tracks clattering over the cobblestones of a defeated Germany. Few of these vehicles would return home unchanged. Many bore the names of girlfriends, hometowns, or baseball teams painted on their sides, fading under months of mud and fire. But for those who rode in them, the Hellcat was more than a machine. It was a survivor. In the post-war years, historians and engineers studied its record and wondered how something so lightly built could destroy tanks twice its size. The answer, they discovered, wasn't just technical, it was cultural. The Hellcat reflected an American belief that wars were won by movement, coordination, and production, not by building monuments of steel. It was a tank that fought with wits rather than weight. Against the industrial arrogance of the Axis, it stood as proof that simplicity could outsmart complexity. Even long after the war, veterans would talk about the way it moved. They remembered how it leapt forward like a living creature, how the engine's roar drowned out fear. They remembered the smell of oil and cold air, the trembling hands on the gun's breech, the adrenaline that blurred seconds into eternity. For many, the Hellcat wasn't just a weapon, it was the heartbeat of survival. Decades later, when a restored M18 fired its gun at an airshow, the veterans who stood watching fell silent. The blast echoed through the air like an old ghost clearing its throat. One of them, a former gunner, said quietly, "We trusted that machine more than anything. It never let us down." In the end, the M18 Hellcat symbolized more than speed. It symbolized the American soldier's capacity to adapt, to face superior firepower, and find victory in ingenuity. It was never the biggest nor the toughest, but it was often the first to arrive and the last to retreat. For the men in the forests of Belgium and the plains of France, it turned terror into momentum, and momentum into triumph. The tank that made German crews pray for fog didn't hide from the fight, it outran it.